Dame i gospodo, zamolio bih vas da zauzmete mesto u sali kako bismo mogli da nastavimo sa prvim panelom. Naš današnji prvi panel se zove Uticaj geopolitike na ekonomiju. Ja ću najpre vam predstaviti učesnike panela i unapred hoću da vam kažem da će panel biti na engleskom. Dakle, I would like to thank to all participants to this panel. Today we have Ms. Tanja Miščević, head of negotiating team of Serbia for EU negotiation. Then from Miščević, Ambassador Michael Davenport, head of EU delegation of Serbia. Then Ambassador Giuseppe Manzo, ambassador of Italy. From my left, Ambassador Michael Kirby, ambassador of the United States. Then Ambassador Christine Moreau, ambassador of France, and far left, Ambassador Heinz Wilhelm, ambassador of Germany. So, in today's session, we'll have 2 rounds of questions. First question would be dedicated to general political situation within the EU zone as well as European Union. And we'll start with Ms. Miščević, and then Ambassador Davenport, Ambassador Kirby, Ambassador Wilhelm, Ambassador Manzo, and finally Ambassador Moreau. In the second question, which we'll dedicate to Serbian matters, we will go the other way around. So I will kindly ask you all participants to stay within the planned time in order to keep the planned schedule. What is to finish by 1:20 latest? So 2 rounds of questions, 1:20. We have plenty of time to discuss about it. So, first of all, with the general question, we did have an important course of events in the Ukraine and Syriza victory in Greece that are affecting EU profoundly. When we had our last Koponik Business Forum, Ukraine crisis was just at the beginning, and no one could predict Syriza's rise to power within just 1 year. On one hand, we have economic sanctions that were imposed against the Russian Federation by European Union as well as by United States. And this is very costly for EU zone, much less costly for the United States. In addition, there are rising tensions that have distanced Russian Federation from deeper cooperation with the European Union. The end of the South Stream projects negatively affected EU countries as well as Serbia. For example, Serbia lost its initial investments as well as potential revenues and jobs. At the same time, I have mentioned Syriza's victory, which opened a new wave of political tensions and new dilemmas. Is there any other way for country recovery instead of austerity and fiscal savings? Given that European Central Bank has committed to quantitative easing of roughly 1 trillion euro, which was started actually yesterday, is it not natural to have a serious revision of the austerity programs judging by their results so far? So my first question to all of you, with the order I just mentioned, would be, what are the prospects for the resolution of Ukraine crisis and the re-establishment of normal relations between European Union and Russian Federation? Secondly, the question which is connected to a situation in Greece, will the renegotiation with Greece bring some new solutions and would elevate some of the defects of the Eurozone? Apart of monetary expansions, can you see some other measures that might preserve the Eurozone in a much sounder basis? As I mentioned, our first speaker will be Ms. Tanja Miščević, so I will try to adjust question for Tanja. Tanja, question for you. How these raising political tensions in the Ukraine and Greece both, and possible pressure that are coming from upcoming elections in European Union, for example, Spain, can affect the Serbian position in the negotiation with European Union, Actually, do you think that it may slow down process of negotiation with European Union, or there is no impact whatsoever? Tanya, please.
Thank you very much. It is my pleasure to be here a second year now discussing in this first panel. And Ambassador Manso and we had a chat before the panel actually started. What are we going to say? Now we know.
Don't say it all. Just
okay, no. Now we know that there are questions that we're supposed to answer. And although I'm tempted, being the political scientist, international politics is something that I was the researcher for, of course, that I will put the emphasis on the part of your question. What will be the repercussion of the developments in terms of the international and geopolitical, geostrategic developments, globalization, and the rise of some of the political movement or the political parties which will have the repercussion on the Eurozone, on the process of negotiation of Serbia. But before answering, just to add that there are several other issues that we will have to have in mind when assessing if all that is going to have influence on the negotiation path. First of all, we cannot forget that last year was the year of the elections in the European Parliament, which also created the new structure of the European Parliament, the new political balance over there. Second very important movement is, of course, the creation and the election of the new European Commission. And a post of the new commissioner, who is not now dealing not only with the enlargement policy, but also Eastern policy, or a much more precisely defined neighboring policy of the European Union. So altogether creates a very interesting situation where the European Union is in the very deep debate and discussion of its own development regarding the economic and financial crisis, regarding answering to the right-wing political attitudes within the European Union, which exist for some times now. The very known enlargement fatigue, which also creates enough problems for the European Union to fight with the additional issues of Ukraine, Russia, and Islamic State, of course, which is the issue we cannot forget completely. So the fight against terrorism is one of the important things. Why I'm adding those two important steps and elements from 2014, the election of the European Parliament and the new European Commission, because not only that the situation that they were faced once when they sat in their own new offices, but they are new in dealing with those issues. So even now, at the very beginning of their term, especially people within the European Commission, we can notice that actually they are getting into the issue, that they are now much more dealing with understanding the portfolio and understanding the whole policy that they are dealing, each and every of them. And that finally they are starting, there being the European institutions, starting to deal with even us. And I can give some of the arguments. So only the end of last year, actually, we've got the policy towards Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is now full-fledged policy, which is now completely supported and which is pursued by Mrs. Mogherini, the High Representative, as the somebody who is dealing with the issue. So only now we can see a group of the reports within the European Parliament presented by rapporteurs for the Western Balkan countries, in which you will have the first feeling for each and every of those countries coming from the new members of the European Parliament. It isn't easy. You saw that it wasn't very easy to explain the position of my country, of our country, Serbia, to the European Parliament, where there are some member states also willing to put some of the bilateral issues in it. And the third very important thing is actually that we are now entering the end or finishing the first phase of the negotiation process, which is finalizing the screening exercises. We are going to finalize the whole process of 35 screenings for 35 chapters, 24th of March, which will mean that we are entering the second phase. So the answer to your question, yes. It is going to have a huge influence on the negotiation process and the negotiation path. First of all, because we are now dealing with the new people. I'm not stating that those people that we are dealing with, Commissioner, High Representative, are not good people, but they are new, which is important element. And they are also dealing with some other issues which are within their reach or within the portfolio that they are dealing with, that they are obliged to deal also. And some of those issues are much more problematic, pending, than the issue of negotiating, not only with Serbia. The outcome is actually that it might be a little bit too bold to say that the enlargement policy nowadays within the European Union is not the main policy of the European Union, is one of the policies that will have important standing point only in times to come.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you very much. So, Ambassador Davenport, a question for you is not about the impact on Serbia, but about the prospect for resolution of the Ukraine crisis and your view regarding dilemmas that were opened with Syriza's victory in Greece. Please.
Thank you, Alexander. Actually, I was rather hoping that you would devise a special question for me as well. This year, it's again delightful to be back on the platform. Of course, without Johannes with us, we're not the seven dwarves, but you're still Snow White. The prospects on Ukraine. I would slightly, if I may, sort of turn the question around a little bit. Of course, the existence of conflict in Europe, the first serious conflict in that region of Europe since the Second World War, can only be bad for all of us. Can only be bad for us in terms of our overall security. Can only be bad for us in terms of our economic prospects. But I think that there is a broader question here, which is about the relationship which the European Union, but also individual member states of the European Union, and indeed the United States, I think, is able to and it is feasible to develop with Russia. I think the goal in dealing with the relationship with the Russian Federation as a major political and economic and trading partner coming out of the end of the Cold War period has been to establish a constructive partnership. That has been the goal of Western policy, I think. And indeed, we've had these moments like the setting of the reset button by President Obama and at the time when President Medvedev was in the Kremlin, of hope that this relationship could be put on a stronger and better footing that would be in everybody's mutual interest. Unfortunately, very often the experience has been other, and whether we're talking about the the geopolitical crisis, the Georgia crisis of 2008, the first Ukraine, which was a gas crisis in 2009, or indeed some of the other issues more related to rule of law, such as the Litvinenko or Magnitsky cases. The experience has been to be knocked back. And of course, 2014, with the annexation of Crimea and the situation that's arisen with the separatists in eastern Ukraine, is a very serious challenge to all of us. I think that, what more can be done other than to use the channels for dialogue which exist. I really don't know. I think that we should be supporting those efforts. The achievement of the second Minsk agreement and the ceasefire, I think, gives us some degree of hope that we get a breathing space that we can use. And even yesterday, there was an agreement, I think, on the OSCE providing a larger number of observers in eastern Ukraine, which again could help to create a greater sense of confidence about the actual facts on the ground. But there are commitments there. The commitments need to be met. There are actions that have been taken that for the European Union, and I can't speak for the United States, but I think also for the USA, have not been acceptable. But we have to deal with the situation we've got, and I think we need to be realistic in the approach. Serbia, of course, as chair of the OSCE in 2015, does have a very important role to play. And I think it's very encouraging so far. There's very good working relationship between EU and EU member states with the chairmanship in office, and indeed between the High Representative and the chairman in office. But I think Tanya is absolutely right to point to some other issues that are a serious threat to all of us. And I'm thinking in particular of those coming from the very, very precarious and dangerous situation which has arisen in many parts of the Middle East and North Africa. The threat from ISIS, Islamic State, from the very difficult situation and dangerous situation in not just Iraq but also Syria and Libya. And I think there is has been a growing recognition, including in Serbia, of the implications for us and for our security and for our societies of growing radicalization and the fact that there are those in our societies who are prepared to subscribe to the goals of the radicalized Islamists. This is a threat to all of us, and I think it's very good that Serbia is taking that as seriously as is the case. Tanya spoke quite a bit about the EU-Serbia dynamic. As far as Greece is concerned, obviously there was a lot of uncertainty in the run-up to the elections about how the relationship between Greece and the Eurozone, rest of the Eurozone and the European Union would work out. It's still not resolved, but as I think Pierre Moscovici said the other day, the basis is there now for getting out of this situation. The basis is there for maintaining the policy of reform in Greece. There's a serious, I think Pierre Moscovici described the proposals from Athens as a serious starting point, and this has allowed all parties to this to have a breathing space to move forward. I think what seems to me to be clear is that nobody actually wants the departure of Greece from the Eurozone, actually either in the Greek government or in any of the other European Union member states. So I think there's a common agenda there. I'll come back to some of the points that Tanya made perhaps later, just to make one point, which is about the new Commission. As you said, there's a new leadership, there's a new President of the Commission, there's a new President of the Council, there's a new High Representative and Commissioner with responsibility for enlargement. I think what struck me most of all, you might say, I would say this, wouldn't I? But what struck me most of all is how the European Union has actually maintained the engagement on the enlargement agenda over the last few months. The fact that Johannes Hahn actually visited Serbia first amongst enlargement countries, I think, showed that very soon after he took office, I think showed the commitment that he has. And the fact also, just to give you one more example, the fact that Federica Mogherini called the meeting of the dialogue between Pristina and Belgrade virtually at the first possible opportunity after the formation of a government in Pristina, and produced a result, which I think is even more encouraging. So I think we're now back on a political track in the dialogue, which is crucially important to Serbia's next steps.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, on your very complex answer on this particular question. So now I will switch on my left, Ambassador Kirby. First question was, what is your standpoint, Anglo standpoint, regarding Ukraine crisis? On the second question, I would like also to adjust the question, since the Syriza's issue is completely connected to EU. So rather to ask you, what is your opinion regarding fiscal consolidation as a way of recovery in general, and in particular, what is your opinion about the fiscal consolidation that is currently implementing by the government of Republic of Serbia? Ambassador, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's interesting sitting here as a non-EU member, but I'm in Serbia. You're not yet an EU member. But the relationship with the United States and the European Union has been long and I think productive, and we're trying to expand that relationship. We're in important negotiations on expanding the economic, doing a treaty that should help both of our sets of economies. And I want to focus part of Ukraine and my answer on that, but a lot of this, it's an economic forum. And the consequences of economic policies that don't work, the consequences of energy policies and the complexities of energy. There was a sequence that led to, I think, a large mistake by Russia to annex a chunk of its neighbor, and then to get involved or precipitate a civil war in eastern Ukraine. And I think, from my point of view, I was quite perturbed to see the assassination of Boris Nemtsov the other day. And, the first responses out of Moscow was it must have been a provocation by somebody from Ukraine to do this. I find that extraordinarily difficult to believe. Be that as it may, we need a good relationship with Russia. The world needs the United States and Russia to have a relationship, and I think Europe needs a relationship with Russia. But it can't be one-sided. Some have said that Europe is paying all the economic consequences. The U.S., certainly Russia for the United States, is a less important trading partner, but our exports to Russia dropped 17% July to December 2014 compared to the previous year. So it's not been inconsequential. And for Boeing, Russia has been an important source of engineers, and technological know-how. So it's not inconsequential to us. But Tanya raised some of the other issues in the world. For those who follow the broader world, Benjamin Netanyahu is speaking today in Congress, and it's rather controversial, shall we say, that he's speaking in Congress today. But he's speaking there in part because of the Iran nuclear issue, which we've been quite engaged with Russia in the P5+1 process of trying to resolve peacefully. Russia will continue to play and must play an important role. When we switch to Serbia, there's also the issue of energy, which I think part of Ukraine's problems over the years is they have not tackled economic reform sufficiently, and they have not dealt with their energy dependence. I think we're seeing lots of changes in energy. The United States consumption of energy has gone down every year since about 2008. We have changing driving patterns, and even though our economic growth has been fairly good the last couple of years, year on year our energy consumption is going down, in part because Americans have come to recognize that they have to shift to a less energy intensive means of transportation. We're having to increase the car mileage. Even though the United States is somewhat insulated from the energy crisis because of fracking and other ways, our energy consumption is up significantly. Europe has energy issues with Russia, but because we've seen the problems with Libya, Libya is a huge potential exporter. Algeria has had some threats and some takeovers of their gas fields. The energy issue is important here. I note that there's a wind farm that's one of the sponsors of this event. Serbia's got to get a little more serious about energy conservation and doing something about its energy issue. Whether South Stream collapsed or not is separate from energy dependence on only one place. So I think it's on that, I think for Serbia, the energy issue is huge. I noticed that yesterday Ambassador Chapurin made some talk about in the next 4 years Serbia is going to have to choose because the gas isn't going to flow through Ukraine anymore, and he suggested it'll flow this new pipeline they've talked about through Turkey. But wherever it comes, you have energy issues to deal with. These will be with you for a long time. It's not going to change. Wind could be one. Energy conservation is another. But these are important separate from Russia. These are important with Russia as part of it. Finally, if I can switch to the question of Greece. And the question of fiscal consolidation, you asked about it here. We, in 2008, went through Syria's decline linked to a variety of issues, perhaps more associated with construction and the construction bubble. But we had significant economic contraction. Europe, Spain saw a similar problem, also linked to construction. But we managed through a variety of different policies and perhaps a different approach from Europe to have a fairly robust economic recovery. It's up and down, and it's not as strong as perhaps others have been, but our unemployment rate is at a place that I think many in Europe would like to have. Unemployment hovering around 6% isn't so bad. And I think here the issue comes down to, in Serbia, fiscal consolidation, also accompanied by a growth in the economy, figuring out how you can do that. The conversation that we heard earlier today about getting the transportation infrastructure. You've had loans, but frankly, your highways are not the world's best, nor even perhaps the region's best. And this hampers you. If you're going to have an export-led economy, you have significant issues on getting the goods out. I'm pleased to see that in air, The Air Serbia's results posted, I guess, yesterday were quite good. I think a 2.7 billion euro.
Positive,
A million positive.
million.
But millions are good when you've been having negatives for a long time.
Tens of millions.
In terms of Serbia, we have a certain advantage in the United States because the US dollar holds a slightly different role in the world than the Serbian dinar. So we're able to borrow at rates relatively more favorable than you. But we've also taken steps to really rein in spending in some areas. We've taken steps to make the budget deficit. We spent money in 2008, 9, 10, tremendous amounts of money. But you've seen significant reduction in our budget deficit. Some increases in revenues through modest tax increases. I think that for Greece and for Europe, taking a look at a way to not spend money you don't have, but figuring out how to spend money wisely, and in particular creating jobs, creating future for young people. You've been exporting young people. I would rather see you exporting goods and services produced by the young people, some of whom came back. And I think the government's taken these steps. I think they've passed a number of laws, some of which we've tried to help on. But the next step is, how do you transform that into making it a good environment for, say, Fiat to build the next model of car here, rather than just the Fiat 500L? How do you get other groups to come in? We have Delphi that's been interested. There's another company that has a factory in Mexico that employs 12,000 people, and they're looking to invest here. They have a company here. But are the conditions here, if they could invest, if they could hire a quarter of that number, 2,500 new jobs is good. Mm-hmm. Those are the next step that have to be taken. So it's not just enough, and I think that that's what the Greeks have talked about. It's not just enough to consolidate your budget. It's how do you get people back to work. Your GDP as a percentage, your deficit as a percentage of GDP goes down if your GDP grows. It doesn't just have to go down by shrinking it an absolute number. It's also, if your economy grows by a third, the GDP as the debt as a percentage of GDP drops. And I think people have to figure out how they can make that aspect of it happen.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Ambassador Wilhelm, your country was much more heated than United States regarding Russian crisis. And I know that there is a deep connection between German economy and Russian economy. What is your angle for this problem and prospects for resolution of Ukraine crisis? And also, do you think that Syriza switchery can cause similar political waves in some other countries within EU, since there are some upcoming elections in EU? Please.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe, if you allow, I would just say a word on what Tanya and also Michael Davenport talked about, that is enlargement fatigue. I don't think that's right to believe that there is such a fatigue. At least when it comes to the Western Balkan countries, I think there's a very large unconditional consensus among all EU member states that these Western Balkan countries should become members of the European Union as soon as possible. Obviously, all the conditions have to be met. The countries have to adopt the acquis communautaire, and it's up to the individual country to decide on the time when it is ripe to become a member. And I have to say that sometimes I get the impression that the Serbian government mentions this enlargement fatigue as a kind of a explanation, or even sometimes as a pretext that things are not moving ahead fast enough. And I think that's a very wrong perception. I mean, it depends on, in the case of Serbia, the Serbian government to fulfill the conditions. And when it comes to the famous Chapter 35 or so, when it is obvious that the Serbian government, together with Pristina government, has to implement the April 2013 agreement. So I think it's not right to say that there is an enlargement fatigue. Obviously, the European Union has a lot of internal problems, but that doesn't really prevent enlargement at all. That's just I wanted to say regarding that subject. Regarding the Ukraine crisis, I think Michael has said that. I mean, it's a bad development for all of us, for the whole world. I think it has shaken up the whole political world order. I think even though some people say Europe has lost its importance on the world scene, I think Europe is still an important factor in world politics, and the relations between Europe and Russia are central, I think, to the whole world order. So I think also China, US, everybody is affected by the state of the relationship between Europe and Russia. And so that's why it's so bad and so alarming that this relationship has deteriorated so badly in the last year. And the European Union is working very hard. I mean, France and Germany in particular, we have taken the initiative, and the Minsk agreement, the second Minsk agreement, is certainly a signal for hope. But it will be difficult, and we continue on this dual track approach, dialogue, which is the only way to solve the problem, and keeping up the pressure with sanctions. But I mean, ultimately, it must be the dialogue. I think we have to accept and understand the Russian interests and positions, and we have to take that into account. I think we are going to speak about Serbia in
Serbia will be in the second round.
Question.
Second round, yeah.
So maybe I would
Thank you.
like...
Thank you.
Well, maybe because you mentioned that Germany is hit more severely by this deteriorating relationship than, for instance, Washington. That's certainly true, considering the size of the German-Russian economic relations. But I think that's not what determines our policy. I mean, certainly we take that into account, and the German businesses are also trying to put pressure maybe on the German government not to have sanctions. But it's foremost a political question, and so we are not saying we will not take sanctions because it will hurt our economy. I mean, that's not the approach, and the fact that Germany is following the sanctions, or even, I mean, we are rather in the forefront, shows that we are not. It's not a part of an economic deliberation. It's a political question, and we are ready to suffer the economic consequences that might and might have.
Political course, yeah. So thank you very much. Ambassador Moro, first of all, I wish you a warm welcome. This is your first time in Koponik Business Forum, and I hope you will come and join us next year as well. So the same question.
To me.
Excuse me.
If you are kind to me.
Yeah. The same question for you. Actually, France is the second largest economy within a eurozone. So having in mind the connections with Russia, economic connection, economic cooperation. It's also, you can see the hit to the French economy. So what is your opinion regarding Ukraine crisis and possible resolution? And same question for Syriza and those political tensions that might come.
Yes, well, I would say, like my German colleague, that the attitude towards Russia and this question of sanctions is not conditioned by economic factors. It's seen in a broader context, and actually it's a tool to achieve results. And we do hope that it will be efficient, and the future of the sanctions are going to depend on the implementation of the Minsk agreement, because that is the only way that we have found, and I'm proud that our two countries, Germany and France, have taken the lead in this matter to obtain, which is our most important goal, which is de-escalation in Ukraine. It's very important because, of course, this crisis has shaken us politically, psychologically, socially also, if I may say. And it's particularly important in the case of Ukraine, which is a neighboring country for the EU, and with which we wanted individually and globally in the framework of the EU to develop a neighborhood policy. So this is the way we are seeing the situation in Ukraine. We do consider Russia as an important partner in the relationship, bilateral relationship with our country, in the relationship globally with Europe, but also beyond Europe, because we have evolving in a more and more complicated world with a lot of problems, a lot of regions which are on fire. We must say things as they are. And so we must have the channels of dialogue with all the important partners, and in that way, Russia is an important partner. May I speak also about Greece and the euro?
Yeah, please.
Because you asked the question to my colleagues, so I would like to say that to be sure, all our efforts are devoted and have been devoted for years now to solve the Eurozone problem and keep Greece inside the Eurozone. Probably Greece is the most complicated country in that respect, but it's not the only one which has had problems. And I like to stress that such countries as Ireland, Portugal, Spain have had bailout programs and have implemented them and have exited from those programs. So it shows that the solidarity, all the efforts done by the European Union and the countries individually has had positive consequences, and we do hope that it will be the case also for Greece. And I'd also like to mention that there has been an evolution in the way we are facing this question, an evolution in which, with which France is totally in phase with. We have from the start said that the efforts are legitimate, they are necessary, but when you are facing countries which are in a very fragile economic situation with an important recession, the efforts must not kill patient, and so they must be tailored in consideration of the economic situation. And gradually, the European Central Bank and the Commission are accepting this idea. And there is also an important point I'd like to stress. We have been talking for all these years in the public about the crisis of the Eurozone and so on. But in parallel, the European Union has taken very important and elaborate measures in order to tackle the faults that, the conception faults that we have seen in the Euro construction. And so there have been several packages which have been adopted and which are making more difficult now the attacks against the euro. And finally, also very important factor is that the European Union is now concentrating on growth, because this is the main challenge, and the challenge which is important for our future, for our young people, for employment. So this is the effort, the main effort that the European Union is concentrating on as a long-term prospect, and in particular concentrating the investments in innovation and everything which is the future of the economy.
Thank you very much. So before we start with the second round of questions, just one information to the audience. There is a possibility to send us SMS question. I will try to keep yeah, I know that there are already questions, so I will try to keep, no, I didn't forget Mr. Manson. No, before.
I hope you did.
We finished and we tried. Sorry. Second question, you can send us SMS question. We'll spare final 5 minutes for the audience. Mr. Manso,
No, but
sorry, if you understood it, I forget that you
don't
are
worry,
here.
don't
So
worry. There's a third question that I'm trying to answer myself while you're posing two questions. Why so many people are showing up to a panel called Geopolitical Spillover into Economy? That must be for two reasons, either one or the other. It's like there are a minister here and a governor, or we ran out of coffee in the other room. So no, but I'm being provocative, not because because I think that the idea that there is a spillover, a sudden spillover, it is let's say, a very evocative, journalistic, sensational headline, but it doesn't address the real issue in terms of, we all know the facts, we all know the numbers. We know that as for Russia, and Europe accounts for more than 50% of the trade, export and imports. And Italy, by the way, is the second largest in Europe after Germany. As for energy as well, you mentioned that. A strong dependence from many countries, including Serbia, was a very well-known fact long ago. And again, Italy also had this problem, but we have been working the last years, and we now have 30% out of renewables. We are building Trans-Adriatic pipeline. So what I'm saying is that perhaps we should address the reason, not that this is a spillover, but rather than why we are at this point now. I mean, we know the reason why, because of course it was Ukraine, a sad story, we all know that. But my point is that, and then that my humble contribution to the panel is that I think what the situation shows is that, as unfortunately I said last year, I hate to quote myself, but I said last year here, we need more Europe. We need more Europe we need more Europe, not only in Serbia, sorry, not only in Serbia. Of course, we need more Europe in Serbia, but we need more Europe in Europe. We need more Europe when it comes to govern the world affairs. And of course, when it comes to govern affairs that are closer to us. And I'm mentioning, of course, Ukraine, relations with Russia, but also the Balkans and the Mediterranean as well. So this enlargement issue, the fatigue, not fatigue, are we fatigued, are we fresh? It's something that anyway must be addressed, as Heinz was saying, must be addressed with the utmost, let's say, urgency. We need the Balkans to be part of Europe as soon as possible. That's how we manage to face future problems. So I think that's something, and I'm very happy that there is an Italian up there in Brussels dealing with, it's Michael's boss, it's not my boss anymore, but I'm very happy because she's very devoted to Europe, she's very competent, and she took, and she's taking the Balkans issue up on the agenda of Europe. So what else? I had taken
What
a lot
about
of...
Syriza, Ambassador?
Okay.
You went through very heavy reform, I mean, your country.
Yeah, we're still going through.
Particularly regulatory reform.
Yeah. So Greece. Let me close about Ukraine and say, so let's see it for Europe as a challenge and opportunity to better shape, strengthen, and forge our capability of answering to crisis and perhaps preventing crisis. So as Serbia should do with being OSCE chair this year, so it will be Serbia will be called more and more to take an active role, to demonstrate, to show that it has the will, both the will and the capabilities to have, let's say, an active role. I'm talking about peacekeeping, I'm talking about fighting against terror. So since you asked about Greece, again, that is an opportunity for us, I'm sorry for Greeks, but it is an opportunity for us to show how and if and how much we're able as Europeans to devise mechanisms and rules that are able to face such kind of crisis. So the growth austerity dilemma, we don't see it as a dilemma. Again, and now you would perhaps think that I like to quote myself, but I'd like to quote myself last year when I said here at the same place talking about future Italian presidency of the EU, that growth will be on the top of the agenda. Well, last June, the EU Council adopted the agenda and put growth and development and competitiveness on top of its agenda. Michael mentioned the new commission. The new commission in October approved a plan worth 300 billion euros for investment, so for growth. And now we have the ECB working on this. So, I'm optimistic about this. I think that this should be seized as the opportunity to work on more on this growth side. And so I think that the balance rather than the dilemma, but I would say that the equation between growth and fiscal discipline, not austerity, not fiscal consolidation, is the balancing is changing. Thanks also to, I believe, to my country that has been is putting and will be putting growth on the agenda, higher up on the agenda of the EU.
Thank you very much. Let's finish this first round with the optimism that Ambassador Manso has raised, and now is the time to coming back to the domestic ground, to Serbia. Serbia, as you already know, is trying to open up some chapters in the negotiation for full membership with the European Union. My question would be, how far has it gone in achieving some of the reforms? And what are the three major next steps it needs to take both in terms of the economy and of society at large to further its prospects in accelerating accession. And how your countries can contribute to countries that you are representing to accelerating of the EU, Serbian accession to EU. So, now we'll start with Ambassador Manso.
Okay, so let me, yes, it's working. So I think...
Just one information, we have a remaining 20 minutes.
Okay, so I will skip all my notes and I will just, I like quotes, but this is not from last year, no. No, it's much more important people than I am. The Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, and Professor Đurić. So, Prime Minister said, we are now starting thinking years ahead rather than days and months ahead. So we're talking about strategy, we're talking about not tactics anymore. He was, of course, referring to reform the country. We want to create entrepreneurship spirit. And while Mr. Vujovic mentioned the idea of changing the morale of labor. So not because I'm going to work today that means something. I have to do something to earn my money. And also the quasi-market sector and the partocracy that I saw in Professor Đurić's slides also inspired me. Why am I putting these three things together? Because they all pointing to the same thing. We will be spending 3-4 days here talking about what's needed for the economy now, what's needed for the country. But those three references, those three remarks pointed to the same thing. That is the priority number 1, number 2, and number 3. That is education. You can't think of having entrepreneurs in few years because, of course, we're talking about strategy, as the Prime Minister said. We're not talking about short-term tactics. So if we're talking about strategy, we have to think, as he said, to change the job morale, the ethics. And so the only way to do that is education. So since there was I can't remember who mentioned that, since I'm quoting everybody today, but I can't remember who mentioned it, this new delivery unit. My proposal today to the panel and then to the audience is, since I know that there are delivery units in 4 different sectors, infrastructures, privatization, and so on, I would welcome having a delivery unit on education in the government, because that would be a very, very coherent follow-up to what I heard today by the governor, the minister, the prime minister, and everybody. So this is something that perhaps can be discussed.
Thank you very much. I'm glad that you mentioned education. Just to inform you, here with us, I hope they are with us, not skiing, are 5 best students from the 5 different economic faculties, sponsored by Association of Serbian Economists, in order to motivate them and to transfer this kind of knowledge to their generation. So, Ambassador Moro, same question for you. What major steps should be taken by Serbian government in order to accelerate negotiation with the EU for full membership?
Well, I could answer by the name of or the number of some of the chapters in the framework of negotiations, but I like this question because it allows a broader approach. So I would say first, and rightly, the Prime Minister puts a lot of emphasis on economic growth. So what is possible in the framework of economic growth? I think it's to give more confidence to the economic actors, of the basis economic actors, which are the businesses. So it means transparency. It means maybe some work in the framework of some chapters like 32, financial control, or 5, procurement, and that is for the economic sector. But I think that the second point would be more social, that is to give more confidence, faith in the future to the Serbian citizens, and in particular to the young Serbian citizens, because you have this problem of youngsters going abroad and not coming back. So I think there is something to be developed to give them the faith in their own country, and maybe easing some social tensions for that purpose. And the third topic, which I consider very important, is the regional cooperation, because it has implications both on the political and on the economic ground. By increasing the cooperation with the neighbors, and I'd like to quote a little bit what we did with the Germans in the 50s, which developed into the European Union at the end of the day. So it's the political aim is evident, but it's also releasing a lot of obstacles to the development of the economy.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Wilhelm, same question to you. Three major steps.
Yeah, maybe just a word on what Christine just said. I think it's important. I mean, I think Serbia is a great country. It has great people, and they should be maybe less pessimistic, maybe less introverted, looking always at themselves. I mean, they are doing quite well. It's a small country, and confidence in yourself is very important. And I think just try to do that, and that's an important thing. But on the question, how can Serbia accelerate the negotiating process? I think we have to talk about the three major chapters, and this is 35, 23, 24. I mean, it's a consensus that these chapters have to be opened first. There can be no other chapter before these chapters. Maybe another one parallel, but not before any of these three. So I think Serbia, as it has done in the last 2 years, has to concentrate on implementing this agreement with Pristina. Now the agreement on the justice sector has been found. It has to be implemented. Then the next big step is this statute for the Serbian community of Serbian community of municipalities. So I think that's important to accelerate this. I have sometimes the impression, I know there has been no government in Pristina and so on, but I don't have the impression that the Serbian government is really putting forward proposals in a very proactive way. They should be maybe more proactive in doing that. I think 23, 24, the action plans are on their way, but on 35, I think implementation of this agreement, they have to come forward with their own proposals and not wait so much for Pristina or the Mrs. Mogherini moving forward. You know.
So that means that the government has to be more proactive.
Yes, at least on 35.
If I may conclude.
Yes.
Okay. Ambassador Kirby, same question for you.
Well, you know, not being an EU member, we don't help the EU set the standards for who it takes in. But, you know, I've been around Europe a bit and lived in Europe. You know, part of it is Serbia has to make the member states believe that it properly is a member state. It just needs to sort of ratify that process. And that is, it needs to be up to membership standards across the board. Now, I would say the economy isn't up to EU standards yet, and you're working on that. The process of getting into the EU should help. Chapters 23 and 24, frankly, you barely have a functioning rule of law. You had, excuse me, that's maybe indiscreet, but you had a lawyer strike for 4 months where the courts were largely closed down. And even when the courts worked, they plod along remarkably slowly. Business needs an environment in which to have certainty. That process of making the reforms you need to do to show the European Union members that you properly belong are important. The dialogue with Pristina is something that we are engaged with. It takes place in Brussels, but certainly we have, I think, a good relationship with Serbia, and certainly we have a good relationship with Pristina, and we can help in that process of reaching agreements. That allows other aspects of the European membership to go forward. I would close by saying, I've joked over my years here that there's only one golf course here and it's only 9 holes, because in order to play golf you have to follow through. And follow through doesn't seem to be a really strong Serbian thing. I mean, Djokovic has gotten it right with tennis, but this implementation is another way of describing follow through. That it's not enough to reach an agreement, you have to implement the aspects of it. It's not enough to create a new set of law on labor, a new set of law on bankruptcy, a new set of law on construction permitting and whatnot, or even enough to take a bunch of loans to build roads. You have to follow through. You have to actually do a plan and then build the road, not just pay interest on the loan for the money that you've taken. So this follow-through / implementation, I think, is, for me, something that's of key importance, and it'll get you on that European path.
Yeah, I can agree with you. Follow-through / implementation / stop-and-go strategy that is cost us a lot. Ambassador Davenport, you are probably having to add something to add in order to give us an advice what kind of things we have to do in order to accelerate our path to European Union.
Well, the process of enlargement of the European Union is one which is very much driven by the member states. It's member states' expectations that we're talking about here. Of course, the European institutions and the Commission are managing this whole process and have huge experience in that. But therefore, I think what we've heard from my 3 EU colleagues is absolutely to the point when it comes to the key issues that need to be addressed. I think economic governance, absolutely crucial. Rule of law and regional cooperation. I think those are 3 issues that have been mentioned. I think if you look at where we are now, a year ago I had a colleague, as I do today, somewhere in the audience, who after this panel told me that all around her everybody had been saying they keep on talking about reform. Well, yes, we did, because there were important reforms that were absolutely crucial and which had been delayed for some time. So I think it's really important to recognise what we heard from a number of speakers this morning about what has been done since we last sat on this panel in terms of legislation on labour, the privatisation and the bankruptcy and the planning and construction. These are all things that we were saying were crucially important to take forward. I mentioned the media as well. There's the important media laws, which are closely related, of course, to the privatisation legislation. yes, there's been a lot of support for these reforms from the European Union, from the economic and finance ministers of the European Union member states, who will be meeting again very shortly, looking ahead on the strength of what's been done in the last 12 months. There's a lot of support from international institutions, and the IMF arrangement is clearly a hugely positive sign. I think if there's an area now looking ahead for the next 12 months within the area of economic governance which probably needs to be focused on particularly, it's really doing even more to create the framework, the business climate to allow the foreign but crucially the domestic investment that we were hearing about earlier. And I think very much linked to all of that, as I think Michael is hinting, is progress on strengthening the rule of law, strengthening predictability, strengthening the ability of the courts to deal with issues. A lot's been done on the corruption, anti-corruption agenda, but a lot more is needed in terms of systematizing the whole thing. Minority rights is also crucial, because unless you have 100% of the society actually able to contribute to the economy, you won't maximize your potential. So that's why 23 and 24, partly why 23 and 24 in the accession process are so important, quite apart from the fact that they represent the core of our shared values, if you like, in the European family. I think on the regional agenda, and I would say that the Prime Minister's decision to go to Zagreb the other day for the inauguration was, I think, an immensely positive and welcome step, very much in line with what we've seen over the last 12 months in the approach to regional policy. The pain that was gone through over the historic visit by the Albanian Prime Minister here at the end of last year. Now he came again in December. Everybody took it as read that the Albanian Prime Minister should come to Belgrade. The Deputy Prime Minister was in Tirana talking about the joint agenda on regional connectivity and transport networks. So I think, and I would put the progress in the dialogue very much in that context. And it's not just about reaching the agreements, but we also sometimes call on other people's help to ensure that they're implemented. So that, I think, needs to be a high priority now that, as I mentioned earlier, we have the political dialogue functioning again properly. Just finally, I would like to sort of underpin what I said about the continuing engagement of the European Union, not just in Serbia, but in the region as a whole, through on the transport and energy infrastructure. There's a very much stronger sense of direction when it comes to investment in infrastructure. I think the Merkel initiative on the Berlin process, now followed up by the Austrians in 2015, and followed through with the meeting later this month in Pristina, where Mr. Dacic and Mrs. Mihailovic are going to meet their Western Balkan 6 colleagues to talk about transport infrastructure. I think this is all part of that engagement in helping a more regional and structured approach to investment in the area. And finally, the floods. The European Union, I think, really showed itself at its best as a reliable partner for Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina in dealing with the immediate issue of tackling the floods, but following through. In this area, really, there has been followed through, and well over 1,000 houses have been either rebuilt or reconstructed. Schools have been put back into action. Farmers have received enough in the way of basic supplies and crops to get them through the winter and face 2015 in a better state. Small enterprises have received small grants. And I think this is really, really important display of European solidarity right here in Serbia. Thank you.
Thank you. Tanya, finally, do we have a ground for optimism in our path to EU?
Well, actually, of course, that we have. And not only because everybody knows that I am born optimist, but because there is also a very good ground for it. Each and every of those strategic routes, paths that dear ambassadors has mentioned here are actually already part of the document that we have prepared. This is the National Economic Reform Program that the minister is going to present in time to come. So I'm not going to be the one to present it. But each and every of those important strategic steps and the strategic goals are part of this document. Let me remind you, this is a document of so-called European Semester Light, which has been introduced for the candidate countries to follow the financial discipline, the economic development, and of course the strategic development of each of and any of the candidate country, which means that comparing with the previous waves of the enlargement, it wouldn't be possible for the newcomer, next newcomer, to enter European Union and not being economically prepared, as well as fulfilling the political and the condition of the acquis, or the European standards, if you want to call it like this. But so that's why I'm optimistic. We have started. There is a very big potential for the implementability, let's call it like this. Because even during the screening exercise, Michael can vouch for this, but also member states, we noticed that we are much better positioned than any other of the candidate country, previous candidate country. So that means that we know how to transpose. We know how to start building the institutions, independent regulatory institutions, but then we face the problem how to implement completely that. For this, we need the help and support of the European Union. And Ambassador Wilhelm, the term enlargement fatigue is not something that I like, but some kind of unwillingness towards the further enlargement of the European Union does exist. If 20% of the EU citizens will answer yes positively for the further EU enlargement. So some problem exists, and let me quote my dear friend, Ambassador Manca. So we need more Europe, but not only in Europe, also here in Serbia, to help us in progressing further. And that's why we are lobbying, let's call it advocating, for opening chapters during that year. And yes, we will put the emphasis on chapter 23 and 24, because this is the baseline, this is the basic. But we cannot do it by ourselves. We need a technical help, guidance, trainings, and of course, funding for providing all of those necessary elements of these basic elements for building the proper society. Not only for ticking the box, so we open some chapters, but because this will bring the benefits to all of us, not to me as a head of negotiation team, but to me as a citizen of Serbia, and that is the most important.
Thanks. There are 3 questions that came from the audience, but I have to apologize to all of you that raised the question, and for all participants, we are far behind the schedule, and because we have some other duties, please accept my apologies that we are not going to answering on these questions. First of all, I would like to thank to all participants on this panel. Let's conclude this panel with the optimism that was raised by Ambassador Manco, and optimism and good ground that we do have, which was explained by Ms. Tanja Mišović. We do hope that this year will be a very crucial year for our negotiation with the European Union for full membership. We do know that programs are here, already prepared, and now it's only issue implementation only. So, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.